Asha, shall we get started?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so welcome everyone. This is John McLaughlin, working virtually from home, and wouldn't you know it, just as we've started, there's construction going on next door, so I'll have to mute myself as soon as I can. But I'm John McLaughlin. I'm the Executive Director of CanPath. You'll hear more about it today. Some of you will already be quite familiar with it, the Canadian Partnership for Tomorrow's Health. Today, we welcome you to this webinar entitled An Overview of the CanPath Portal. A few housekeeping items for today, first of all. So as with webinars, there will be a Q&A session following the presentation. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window, so please enter your question there. And then if your questions don't get addressed in time today, please feel free to contact the team or the speaker, and the links will be shown, but it can be done through access@canpath.ca. We also invite you to connect with us on Twitter using the handle @WeAreCanPath, or on LinkedIn as CanPath. Before starting, we'd also like to acknowledge the traditional lands of the Mississauga and the Nui Credit First Nations, Anishinaabe, Wendat, Huron, Haudenosaunee Indigenous peoples, and thank them for allowing us to reside as settlers on their traditional territories. This territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We acknowledge the land on which we work. Here in Toronto, but we are aware that our work is beyond this geographic area. We recognize that this territory, Indigenous people have endured historical oppression and continue to endure inequalities. And indeed, we are committed to building and maintaining equitable, respectful, and solid relationships with Indigenous peoples and communities, including through the work of CanPath. Well, we meet on a virtual platform today. The project that we are involved with reaches across Canada. And so similarly, the Indigenous peoples from coast to coast, Inuit, Métis, First Nations people, we acknowledge that CanPath is working on their ancestral lands. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Asha Mohammed as the speaker, who is the Access Officer for CanPath. Since CanPath was essentially reformed and a new scientific home was created at the University of Toronto, Asha has been the inaugural Access Officer, and she came to this national project with tremendous experience working across Ontario with the Ontario Health Study. So I'll turn it over to Asha with thanks to each of you. And again, just a reminder to post your questions on the webinar, the Q&A link at the bottom. Asha, over to you.
Thank you, John. So welcome everyone to this webinar on the CanPath portal. As John mentioned, I'm Asha and I'm the Access Officer for CanPath, and my role is to help researchers navigate the access process. Today's presentation is going to be a walkthrough of the portal, showing you where you can find different information and resources, as well as helpful tips and tricks. I'll go through some researcher scenarios near the end, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. Before we do that though, I know that not everyone in attendance is familiar with CanPath or the portal, so we do have a poll to gauge everyone's familiarity. So Arletta is going to post that now onto the screen. We'll let everyone complete it and we'll share the results after I'm done going through a quick overview of what CanPath is, our platform, and how it is designed to support the research community. So CanPath is Canada's largest population health research platform. It's been designed to assess the effects of genetics, behavior, family health history, and environment on chronic diseases. We've done this by collecting data, including health data, genomics, biologics, physical measures, and longitudinal follow-up data from approximately 330,000 Canadians, ranging from age 30 to 74 at the time of recruitment. These participants come from 7 cohorts across 10 provinces. From west to east, these cohorts include the BC Generations Project, Alberta Tomorrow Project, Saskatchewan Path, Manitoba Tomorrow Project, the Ontario Health Study, Cartesian in Quebec, and the Atlantic Path. The number of participants per region is shown in the yellow box, with the notable exceptions of Saskatchewan and Manitoba. So these newest members of CanPath are just getting launched and recruiting respectively. The longitudinal nature of CanPath allows for both retrospective and prospective studies. The current cohort has already been followed for over a decade. CanPath has captured a range of data to enable the study of health and diseases. Across the cohorts, we've collected questionnaire data, biosamples, done some genotyping work, and have conducted a linkage with CANU, an environmental exposure database. The baseline questionnaire captures data at the time of recruitment. Start and end dates vary for each of the cohorts and spans from as early as 2008 until 2017. In addition to this, sampling and recruitment procedures and data collection approaches varied across the cohorts and through time. So this resulted in the creation of study-specific datasets that were harmonized to generate the core CanPath datasets. One thing that this means is that there might be a group of questions asked in 2 of the cohorts and not the others, such as certain mental health questions. So these are collected as part of the baseline mental health dataset, but access to them is the same as access to any of the other baseline variables. And we'll go through some examples later. The follow-up questionnaire was harmonized as much as possible pre-implementation by the 5 participating cohorts and ran from the end of 2016 until March 2018. So the slide here shows some of the domains collected in these 2 questionnaires. So these include participant demographics such as age, ethnic background, socioeconomic status. We also have information on personal medical history and family health history, and on health behaviors like sleep, alcohol, marijuana use, and e-cigarette use. The last 2 only collected in the follow-up questionnaire. This slide here illustrates a sampling of biologics that were collected at baseline. Late last year, we launched a COVID questionnaire that collected information from 6 of the cohorts. This is the first data set available for Manitoba, as they're still collecting and recruiting. The COVID questionnaire includes information listed here, specifically related to COVID, as well as additional questions such as personal medical history of disease and use of prescription medication, and more. As I mentioned before, environmental exposure information is available for all CanPath participants by linkage with CANU. Variables include such things as material and social deprivation index, annual average nitrogen dioxide exposure, and weather and climate metrics. So CanPath data can also be linked to administrative health databases. Administrative data are routinely collected on a large population for official purposes. It can often contain detailed data on harder to reach populations and rare diseases. All mature CanPath cohorts have completed record linkage with regional data holders to some extent, and these are listed here. So that's it for my overview of CanPath. Before we get to details of the portal, I'll ask Arletta to share the results of the poll. So I'm not sure if everyone can see this, but the results show that 73% have never tried to use the CanPath portal before. So it's my goal by the end of this to have you feel a little more comfortable when you do decide to go and explore the portal. Okay. So access to CanPath data is available to researchers, both national and international, and trainees at recognized institutions. All of this can be done through the CanPath portal. By going through national, researchers have the advantage of obtaining harmonized data from multiple regions at one time. So this means quicker turnaround time, less administrative work, and lower fees. You can access the portal by following the link at the top of the menu bar from the main canpath.ca website. Alternatively, you can go directly to the portal with the URL portal.canpath.ca. And one thing to note is that you have to resist the urge to include www at the beginning of this URL. Otherwise, it won't work. Once on the site, you can navigate using the top menu bar or the hexagonal icons, and we'll go through each of these in turn. So the first one is the cohort tab, and as the name suggests, this gives you information on each of the participating regional cohorts. So let me go ahead and launch this. So eventually this will bring up a list of all the cohorts in CanPath, and these pages hold pretty detailed information on each of the cohorts that can provide context on the data that you'll see later on in the data search portal. So for example, we can go ahead and click on Alberta Tomorrow Project. The layout of all the cohort pages is relatively the same. So you'll have an overview, which includes a link to the cohort website as well as contact information. Study design that does hold some contextual information about the cohort. So on this page, we see that by 2008, Alberta had already recruited over 31,000 participants in what is referred to as Phase 1. At this time, funding for CanPath, previously known as CPTP, became available, and the Alberta Phase 1 participants were reconsented to join CanPath, and additional participants enrolled directly into CanPath. If we scroll further down, we see some publications from the group and a timeline of collection events. So if we click on the first one here, ATP Phase 1, this gives more detailed information of what was collected at this time. Clicking on Phase 2 does the same thing, and we see that this is when the baseline recruitment to CPTP or CanPath began. Also on this page, you can see selection criteria. The age range here was from 35 to 69. And if you remember before, I mentioned that the CanPath age range is 30 to 74, so that the Alberta participants are slightly different. We also see that there is a selection criteria for health status. So at the time of recruitment, participants would have to be cancer-free other than non-melanoma skin cancer. So that's for Alberta, and we'll just go back and take a look at another cohort. So if we click on BC Generations, you'll see it's pretty much the same layout as before. We have an overview, study design, there's a link to a marker paper, as well as a different timeline. So we see here that this looks pretty different from the Alberta timeline. We have a baseline collection. So there was no pilot for BC. And if we scroll down to the selection criteria, we see that the minimum age is 35 with a maximum age of 74. Again, slightly different from Alberta. We also see that there isn't any health selection criteria here. So BC was able to enroll participants who did have cancer as well as didn't have cancer. That wasn't part of the selection criteria. Scrolling further down, we have some data collection events. And so we see that BC has a baseline data set as well as a follow-up questionnaire that we've touched upon before. There's also something called the residential history. So while I've mentioned before that baseline follow-up are part of the harmonized core questionnaire, the residential history questionnaire is not. So this is something that is specific to BC and is considered a non-harmonized questionnaire. So the next tab we'll go to is biosamples. So the biosamples tab gives an overview of the biologics at CanPath. This is the same table as the image I showed you previously in the presentation. On this page, we also have more information about biosamples, including collection, shipping, processing, storage, and also how to apply for samples. So there are specific considerations, including some guidelines and feasibility review criteria. And if we click on this, it does take us to another page where you can read more about it. It also has information on shipment to the approved user, as well as return of derived data that is required for users of CanPath Biologics. All right, so the Access tab. The Access Process tab outlines how to go about an application. So the three main steps of the application, including creating an account, submitting an application, and tracking request are outlined here. In addition, it lays out all the documents that are needed in an application to consider the application complete. So the completed application form can actually be found on the portal, and we'll go through an example of that later. In addition to this, we also require a research protocol, proof of scientific review or peer review if it's available, approval by a research ethics board, evidence of funding, and a 2-page CV of the principal applicant. So once an application is completed, all documents submitted, the CanPath access process begins. So the first step of this process is the administrative assessment, completed by myself as the access officer. Here we ensure that all documents have been submitted, that documents aligned, for example, that the proof of funding is for the same project that is being submitted, and that the REB matches the research proposal in the application. We also look for any obvious ethics related issues. For example, if the project requires, if the project requires something like a full digit postal code, this isn't something that CanPath can provide. Once the issues, if any, are addressed, the application moves on to feasibility assessment. So this is completed by the regional scientific directors, and the group ensures that CanPath has the resources to complete the project. For example, if the project requires 5 mil of DNA from cancer-free participants, this group makes sure whether or not CanPath has those samples that match that criteria. If a researcher is interested in occupational health questions, this group would sort of flag that perhaps this information isn't available from all cohorts, or that the information is available only in text and requires extra work on the part of the researcher to make it usable. Once a researcher has addressed any concerns brought up by this group, the application moves on to the Access Committee review, either an expedited or full Access Committee review, depending on the nature of the request. This independent committee reviews the science of the application. The group has relevant expertise in fields such as epidemiology, biostatistics, and genomics. Either the full committee or a subset of the committee determines the final approval of a project. So if we scroll further down, this table here shows the difference between the expedited and full Access Committee review and how each is determined. So projects requesting access to only the harmonized data, also known as core data, are eligible for expedited review. These datasets include the baseline questionnaire, the follow-up questionnaire, COVID, and the CNU dataset. These applications are reviewed on a rolling basis with a turnaround time of approximately 3 weeks. So just one note, given the immediate need for pandemic research, a harmonized national data from CanPath's COVID-19 questionnaire is eligible for a special 9-day review process. All other requests, including those for non-harmonized data, biosamples, and linked administrative data, go through a full Access Committee review. These applications are reviewed on a quarterly basis, with meetings held in March, June, September, and December. In order to be eligible for a meeting, the application must be submitted 6 weeks in advance. So this means that for the June full Access Committee meeting coming up, the application would need to be submitted by April 23rd. Scrolling further down, this page also has links to the CanPath access policy, and this has more information on the criteria and requirements for access to CanPath. The Access Costs tab contains a link to a cost estimate form This form is used when inquiring about cost for access to CanPath data or when requesting a letter of support. And we will go through an example of that later. At the bottom are helpful links. Some of them you've seen in other pages, such as the guidelines for biosample access and the biosample feasibility review. So finally, we're going to go back to the data tab. This tab gives you more information on the harmonized data sets. Clicking on the hexagon, you're brought to a page that outlines the different types of data available at CanPath. You can click on genotyping data, and this gives more information about the genetic data available for 4,800 CanPath participants, or you can click and learn more about the type of data available from CNU. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the site live. So clicking on core data brings you to a page that gives an overview of the CanPath datasets. Of interest are the datasets listed here, which are all considered part of the harmonized or core datasets. I have alluded before that not all cohorts have collected all variables across all domains. So we can take a look at an example from the baseline health and risk factor questionnaire, additional diseases. So we see here that there are 460 variables in this. And before I click on it, I will mention that everything with the baseline in the title is considered part of the baseline questionnaire. So if we click here, it opens up another page with more detail on the questionnaire. So we do have description, again, the number of variables, but of most interest would be the individual studies included. So we see that the additional disease questionnaire includes data from BC, Quebec's Cardigan, and the Ontario Health Study. And as the name of the data set suggests, a lot of the questionnaire fall under the category of diseases, and we have a few others as well. So going back to the data tab here, we can navigate from the toolbar. We can click this button here to look at the harmonized variables. We can also click on search and it'll take us to the same space. So we'll just go ahead and click here. So this is the page that lets you explore the data. All the data sets other than information on biosamples can be found here. You're able to search through a wide variety of methods. So if we click on areas of information, we see that there are predefined domains that sort of group together variables of interest. So if we click on, let's say, tobacco, see that there are 65 variables that fall under the category of tobacco, and these are also across different data sets. So let me just quickly explain what we're seeing here. The name column refers to the variable name as it would be presented in any data set that CanPath provides to an approved user. There's also a label column that's a short description of the variable. Annotation refers to the areas of information domain that we looked at before. Data, population, and DCE don't normally change. And then finally, the dataset tab includes, lets you know which data set this question can be found in. We can also search by source and target. So the source being questionnaires, physical measures, biosamples, or government and database registries. And we can also see what the target of the question was. So while it is a lot of questionnaire data, sometimes the questions are asked about the participant's child, parents, grandparents, siblings, or other. So if you were interested in looking at perhaps family history, you might be interested in children, parents, grandparents, siblings. And finally, if you're really familiar with the CanPath data, you can search for the variable name directly or the label. Alternatively, you can also pick which data set you'd like the information from. So they are in a bit of code, but if you hover over, it does explain exactly what the data set is. So this one here is about the interpretive variables. This is related to biologics, and an example variable would be the amount of time a participant had a drink before they provided a sample. So going back to our tobacco domain example, one thing I would like to note is that we see that there are different data sets that come up when we click on tobacco. There are also 65 variables in total, so it would be a little difficult to scroll through and identify exactly which data sets hold this information. Instead, what you can do is click on coverage, and it lets you know exactly which data sets this is found in. So the domain of tobacco under lifestyle and behavior, we see that there are 2 questions in the interpretive data set, 5 in the COVID-19 data set, 13 in the follow-up questionnaire, and then 45 in the baseline. If you were interested in the tobacco questions from only the baseline questionnaire, you can click on the checkbox there and then hit filter selection. And now we see that there's only 45 questions from the baseline questionnaire. And if you go back to list, they are listed there for you. Okay, so one thing I did want to do was click on an example of a data set, or sorry, of a variable. So we'll go back here and we'll click on cigarette use ever. So if we click here, we'll be taken to the variable page. And we'll see here the label as well as a longer description of this question as it appeared in the questionnaire. So this one is an indicator of whether the participant has ever smoked at least 100 cigarettes during their life. Scrolling down, we see that this is a categorical variable, 0 corresponding with never smoked, at least 100 cigarettes, and 1, yes, they have ever smoked at least 100 cigarettes. We also have some summary statistics for this. So both in chart form and a pie chart. One thing to note when you're looking at this is for the frequency, while there is just a singular account, there are 2 percentages, and these can vary slightly. So the first percentage, or the top percentage, is the count over the total number of participants. So this includes all valid results, so 0s and 1s, as well as any missing data. The lower percentage is the percentage over valid results only, so only the 0s and 1s, not taking into account missing data. And it's this bottom percentage that is reflected in this chart here. Also on this page, there's a tab that says Show Harmonization Results. So if we click here, we get tons of information. And so it might be a little confusing at first, but what this is showing is where this question appeared in the different cohorts and in the different data sets of those cohorts. So for Atlantic Path, we see that there are 2 different data sets, and all of this can be found, more detail about this and the context of this can be found if you look at the cohort page. But for now, we'll just take a look at this question in one of the Atlantic Path data sets. So we go ahead and click on it. We come to a page that looks very similar to where we were, but this will only be specific to the Atlantic Path dataset 1. And we see here that there are frequency stats for this group as well. So this might be something of interest if a researcher is looking at, or might not be looking across all cohorts and wants information on just 1 or 2. Okay. So I did mention a applying for access through CanPath, and the first thing that you need to do is register to log in. So this yellow bar will be available from any of the tabs. You can click on it at any time to register. And once you do, you will have access to the application form. And we'll go into this in more detail during one of the examples, which will start right now. So the first example, we have MSc candidate Arletta Max, who is a curious trainee. So Arletta is a graduate student and she's interested in the area of mental health and COVID. And in particular, her question is, does CanPath have the mental health information for those who completed the COVID questionnaire? So Arletta might go to the CanPath website, and since she's been here before, might go directly to the search bar. Once here, she might go directly to areas of information and take a look and see which of these domains relates back to mental health. So if we scroll down, some diseases, we see mental health and behavior disorders here. Might be interested in that, click. We scan some more, and there's also a domain related to psychological distress and emotions, and hovering over, we see that this does include depression and anxiety. So we can go ahead and click that. We see that there are 167 variables that fit this criteria. We click that, and we're just going to load a few more variables so we can view them all on one page. And immediately we see that, yes, there are some questions related to mental health, and scanning through, we see that, yes, the COVID-19 questionnaire is included. Scrolling further down, we do see that this particular question, becoming easily annoyed, is included in the follow-up questionnaire. So one thing you can do, as mentioned before, is go to coverage. We see that it's, we have a few more data sets than just the COVID data set, but go ahead and click on COVID, filter, and then go back to lists. And there we have just the COVID questionnaire mental health questions. If Arletta had been logged in, she's able to save this onto her profile, and we can go through an example of that a bit later. Right now, going back to Arletta's original question, does CanPath have the mental health information for those who completed the COVID questionnaire? The answer would be yes, and she can continue building her research project based on the variables that we do have. The next example is a senior career researcher, Dr. Mark Avon, who is working towards submitting a CAHR grant. Their area of interest is family history of cancer, and they're looking for a letter of support. So first thing Dr. Avon might do is, again, go to the CanPath portal. And say, for example, he already knows that he requires a sample size of at least 1,000 participants for his project. So how would he be sure that CanPath has the number of participants? So first off, he can look to see whether we have information related to family history. So if we go under source and target, he can choose any number of targets. So perhaps he is really interested in history of cancer in parents. Go ahead and click that. We see that there are 267 variables. By going to areas of information, we can refine this to include just cancer. Here it's classified under neoplasms. Go ahead and click that. We see now that the variables jumped to 546. When we clicked on parents, it was roughly around the 200 mark. So this is an increase when we were expecting smaller numbers for the specification. This is because of how the search results are automatically generated. So if we look here, we see that we've looked for parents and we've looked for neoplasms. If we click on advanced, we see that the search is for anything related to parents or anything related to cancer. So what we want to do is change this to "and." And now we see that there are 999 variables. Perfect. We can go under coverage, and maybe this researcher is interested in only the baseline questionnaire. So we can click that, filter selection, and then go back to his list. Now he wants to make sure that CanPath has at least 500 participants for his project. So he can click on this variable of interest to him, the lifetime occurrence of cancer in mother. It opens up the page. And scrolling down to the summary stats, we can look at the categories first. So 0 is equal to mother had no cancer, 1, mother had cancer. So looking at the ones, we see that there's over 64,000 participants who reported that their mother had cancer. So CanPath is more than equipped to help Dr. Avon with his research. One thing Dr. Avon can't do from the portal is take a look at the number of participants who reported their mother having cancer, who also reported having cancer themselves. So unfortunately, the search is not able to do cross tabulations. And this is an instance where Dr. Avon can reach out to the Access Office and get that aggregate data that way. There isn't a form to fill out. He can simply send an email asking for the information, and the Access Office responds within 3 days with that information. So because he's requesting a letter of support, Dr. Avon can get that template directly from the portal. We can go back to the access page, scroll down to access costs, and click on the cost estimate form. This downloads a Word document for Dr. Avon to fill out and includes such things as a project overview, the data sought, any biosamples if requested, and any linkage if it is applicable. I will direct your attention to Part D, the CanPath data sought. This is where Dr. Avon can list those variables that he found during his portal search, and also list any of the data sets that he's particularly interested in here. Going back quickly, I also just wanted to highlight that CanPath does try to give letters of support within 10 business days, and that the provision of a draft letter of support is always encouraged. All right. Finally, we have the example of Dr. Taylor Mukasa, who is ready to apply. So Dr. Mukasa is a mid-career researcher. He's interested in the relationship between blood pressure and sleep, and he's looking to apply for CanPath. So Dr. Mukasa would first register for an account. Do that here, filling out some very basic information, waits for an email, and then creates a login. I will just switch over to Firefox, where I'm already logged in here. And so once he's logged in, he can navigate to Access. Make sure that I am actually logged in, which I wasn't. So log in, not a robot. And then go to My Access Requests. Any of the previous applications will be shown here. We see that there was a application previously approved, but if he wants to create a new application, we simply click on New Access Request. So this brings up the CanPath Access Application form. So there are some instructions as well as helpful links at the top, but the application is relatively straightforward. They'll include details about themselves and their research team. More research team here, project, scientific abstract, details about the design, a lay summary. Over here, they're able to upload any of the documents that are required, so including the 2-page CV, proof of peer review, any of the ethics documents. And once this is completed, they're able to either save it to come back and complete later, or go ahead and submit. So that's it for the examples. One thing I wanted to mention is that there are some upcoming changes to the portal. We're going to have some minor appearance updates to make the website more user-friendly. And we're also going to be updating that application I just showed you. So what we'll be doing is adding additional questions to sort of help reduce the time between the back and forth between researcher and committees asking for more details, and would hopefully make the review process quicker. So as mentioned before, not everything can be answered through the CanPath portal. You are always able to contact the Access Office, whether you're looking for information on cross tabulations between different variables, requesting a letter of support or a cost estimate, or any general questions you might have about CanPath and the access process. And that's all to access@canpath.ca. So that's it for my presentation. I just want to thank CanPath participants across the regions who generously donated their time, information, and biological samples. CanPath is a success because of their ongoing commitment. And before we open up the floor to any questions, I just want to ask Arletta to once more share a poll gauging how comfortable everyone is using the portal now. And maybe while we wait for the results, we can go ahead and answer any of the questions that have already been posed. John, are you able to read out some of the questions? You're muted right now, John. Sorry, John, you're muted.
Sorry about that. So I don't actually see on my computer any questions in the Q&A presently. So while we wait for others, first of all, thank you, Asha, for walking through for the whole portal. But I think the examples were instructive as well to show people what to expect and how to proceed for, first of all, learning what's the content of the data sets are, and then also what the various types of access process could be. Maybe I'll just make a contextual comment while we're waiting for additional comments. So one thing for those of you who had not tried to access the portal before, and I'm sure that many of you would be very familiar with cohort data, and that's why the introductory part of Ash's presentation was important. But you will note that presently the portal is not a way to immediately dig into the data that you would use for your research projects, but it is a portal into gaining access. And there are particular reasons why it's structured this way. And it does relate to the challenges in Canada of bringing data together from the provincial entities into a national harmonized data set. So there are specific obligations, standards, partly ethical standards, but it's also data access, personal health information protection standards that come from each province. So what has been constructed over the past decade is a way to bring together data from across Canada into a national harmonized data set. There are other cohorts in other nations where, in fact, de-identified tabular data are more directly accessible through the portal, and we're working together with our partners across Canada to explore what is possible in Canada, but that's presently not available. Yet there is a way, as Asha has said, that we've developed a a process, especially for the harmonized data set access. It actually goes pretty quickly, and I applaud Asha and the teams across Canada for getting it up to speed in that way. There are a few questions now. From Martin, nice to hear from you, and good to see that you're still interested. I know that Martin Tamamegi has led some major cohorts himself through his career. So here the question is, do you have to pay for getting cross-tabulation results?
So the short answer, well, the answer is no. There is no access fee for that. However, those cross-tabulation results aren't eligible for publication. So any of the information we give you can only be used to support grants and also to sort of refine the research question.
And then Amadou has asked the question, what makes the CanPath data different from CCHS data apart from biological samples?
CCHS data being the, I'm not sure what that data set is, but I will speak to the size of the CanPath data. So as you mentioned, we do have 330,000 participants, which is largest by far in Canada. We're actually 6 times as large as the next Canadian cohort. In addition to that, we do have biologics, but we also have genotyped samples and the ability to link the CanPath data to the administrative health databases.
I'm terribly sorry that there's construction happening near my home right now. So the CCHS, I can add a bit further to the Canadian Community Health, Canadian Community Health Survey. So CCHS is an excellent cross-sectional survey with repeated cross-sectional surveys done in random samples across Canada. It's never been a longitudinal prospective long-term cohort study. And that's one of the key differences, that CanPath is Canada's first large-scale population-based cohort. So there's a role for CCHS, there's no question. And indeed, the questions that we've used in our CanPath questionnaires are very much based on the standard survey questions that have been used by Statistics Canada and other organizations. So CanPath is clearly complementary, but by having larger numbers, prospective follow-up, as well as biological samples, it allows for such things as risk factors for incident cancers and other chronic diseases to be assessed, which was never possible with CCHS. Another question, comment was from Mark, great presentation. How would you save the list of variables to your profile on the portal? Is that possible?
Yes, it is. So I did meant to share that. So let me first go back to where I can get to the website, and I'll show this on my account here. So back to the search, perhaps they're interested in tobacco use. So we want to save these 65 variables. When you're registered, you'll see a new icon beside download. Download simply means that you can download this tabulated list as an Excel file to your local computer. But if you click on this green icon that looks like a shopping cart, you can save it directly to your profile. So you can name it something like tobacco, save. You can see that it was successfully saved. And then at the top here, there's a new option for saved lists. So you can go here and all the variables under your search criteria will be listed here, ready for download at any time. Thank you.
There's a question from April saying, do you have to register for a login ID before being able to look around at the data and the variables in the portal?
Right. So actually, the majority of the demonstration I was doing was without having logged in. So the only things that logging in helps with is to save the search results, as I did now, and also to begin any access requests. for those you are required to register for the portal.
Would you mind to give us more description about the cost estimates that can be approached? Anything
Yes.
further you could add about the costs?
Yeah, so the costs depend on a variety of things. So, for example, we mentioned that CanPath has a variety of different data sets. So we have a COVID data set, a baseline data set, and a follow-up questionnaire. There are different prices associated with those questionnaires, what mostly defined by whether the variables of interest are going to be included in multiple data sets. So that's something that contributes to a cost. For the biologics, depending on the type of biologic that is required for the project, that comes with a different cost. And so we are able to provide a total cost estimate for projects, and these are very helpful when putting together something like a grant proposal.
Again, I apologize for the construction. I'll try to get a word in edgewise between the noise, but Matt has commended you for your seminar. Thank you very much. And then perhaps I can start to answer the question from Itamar. So saying that if not affiliated, I believe that would mean with a university or something, can the data be accessed for independent research? Presently, and it does again relate to the relationship between the host organizations in each province, what's in the consent form in each of those provincial cohorts, and then what's in the data sharing agreements. That presently the structure that Asha has described is really targeted at fostering academic research, and so people who are essentially accredited or trusted researchers can gain access, have permission to then download or use the data. Now, we're exploring some alternatives. For example, there are some possibilities that that non-university-based researchers may be interested in these data, and through basically the policy and the agreements that we have with each of our regions, we're exploring how that type of access could be made available. It seems quite common in many domains where, as with the very first question that came up, can tabular data be obtained, which would usually not be thought to be sensitive, but right now we're still exploring the extent to which such tabular data can be generated and then made available. So in particular, with regard to affiliations, there is potential for industry partners to receive aggregated data. And then similarly, there is potential for individuals, perhaps such as the questioner in this situation, to collaborate and connect with people who do have a research affiliation with the university. Asha, was there anything else you'd like to add on that particular point?
No, nothing to add.
Okay. We have time, so Deb Banney has clarified again the title for CCHS. Thank you for that, Canadian Community Health Survey. Is there anything else? Any other?
Maybe at this time, Arletta can share the results of the poll. So I think everyone can still see my screen. So very happy to report that more of you are feeling comfortable using the CanPath portal. Anytime there are questions, I just wanted to iterate that you are always able to contact access@canpath.ca, and we'd be happy to help you navigate the portal or answer any questions that cannot be found there.
Yeah. So congratulations, Asha. That's a very nice last slide or survey. And for the audience to know, I don't get to vote on that one because as a host, I can't count. So although I'm comfortable, my biased response was not in there. So thank you everyone for basically attending today. I could just pause for another moment to see if there's any last question. Asha, any last words, parting words for you?
No parting words, but I thought I saw something blink in with a new question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I see that now. Amadou has asked, is there any restriction like data research centers on CanPath data? So the RDC, the Research Data Centers, is the mechanism that's used by Statistics Canada, where once someone has had their access or linkage done through one of the Stats Canada resources or platforms, the data can be accessed through the RDC network across Canada. Can you comment on the approach for CanPath?
Yes, so CanPath data is open to being linked to any sort of administrative databases, including those at Stats Canada. The process is going to be specific with each province as well as each administrative data holding. So I would say in theory that this is possible. It really depends on any sort of processes or procedures at that administrative data holding on what can and cannot be done.
Thank you. Now, just to clarify further, so with regard to Amadou's question, much of the portal that was described there is structured in a way that if a researcher is interested in gaining access to the harmonized data set through the Access Office, once approved, the data set will be sent to the researcher. So the simple answer to the question then is no, not in that circumstance. But it's true then, as Asha has said, if our data, the CanPath data, has been linked to another source, which itself has restrictions, that's where if it was, if a researcher did write a grant and say they would like to link CanPath to a Stats Canada data set, it would be the Stats Canada data set that would require those data to be accessed through the RDC. And similarly, provincial agencies, if one links to the administrative health information in one of the provinces, some of the provinces have restrictions on how the researcher can gain that. This is a part of the complexity of doing cross-Canada research in Canada. We're working very hard with many partners to try to help resolve that and fix that. And indeed, even with COVID as we speak, it does seem that Canada has recognized the need to enable information to flow across provincial boundaries, and CanPath is therefore piloting with national agencies ways to do that. So there are sort of yeses and nos to the answer to that question, but there's very rich data possibilities, and we encourage you to reach out to consider using CanPath, and as Asha has said, to contact us. In the chat before, I had listed again the main access email address that and the website addresses, and then finally on the list there we can see one final thank you to Asha, which I will share, but also on behalf of everyone today. Thank you, Asha, for your overview, and to all participants, thank you for attending. We're delighted to know your interest in, and we hope that we are here to serve you and to help you succeed in the research that you can do. And we are here to serve all Canadians, so please join us in that journey. We can sign off now. It's right at time. Thank you all. Take care.